Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, we've just
Yeah.
gone live. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Sorry, I'm a little bit gobsmacked. I just found out that Dr. Ferrial Adam, our guest who I'll introduce in a moment, counted to what I thought didn't scale Mount Kilimanjaro, but scaled Mount Everest. And that was quite surprising, but quite an amazing feat.
So
Cool.
it sounds better than it is.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's get into it. Firstly, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to tune in. I am very excited about this conversation. I'm a big fan of Ferrial's, and I'm sure she's got a lot of really insightful things to offer. So, firstly, Ferrial has been an ardent environmental and human rights activist in South Africa for the past 20 years. Her work in environmental justice in Earthlife Africa, Greenpeace have given her a much deserved platform to speak about human rights violations, politics, and the environment from multiple different levels, from grassroots to higher level policies. She now finds herself heading Water Can as part of OUTA. And I know her personally as an ardent and hard-headed, brilliant activist up on a range of issues affecting South Africans on a daily basis. So very, very warm welcome to you, Ferrial. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Malik. Very kind words. And I think you've been doing amazing work as well. So I'm really glad to see you taking this new step.
Thanks very much, Ferrial. So to give you a bit of context, the reason why we've decided to do this webinar tonight is because the issues in Ward 87, which is having its upcoming by-election, they are multiple, but the one that keeps coming up for us is the issue of water. We felt it fitting to talk about water, not just at a local governance level, or at a ward level, but to contextualize it in the broader crisis that the country is facing, and even broader, what the global water crisis looks like. It's necessary to give ourselves a grounding in how this plays out at multiple levels and what global challenges mean for your street. And so I think Ferrial is a brilliant person to do that. I want to start us off, though, with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. And the quote goes like this: "One of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Much of the damage inflicted on land is quite invisible to laymen. An ecologist must either harden his shell, make believe that the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise." The reason why I think this quote is necessary is because a lot of this conversation might become quite technical. It is good to remind ourselves that, a water crisis is one that affects people on a personal and quite deep level. We have an option of looking away from it and making ourselves believe that it's not a crisis or one that we should concern ourselves with, or we live in a world of wounds. Ferrial, I'd like to believe that you are, like me, living in a world of wounds. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to remark on first with that quote.
No, it's I was just nodding as you were saying that, because it's exactly that, is that it can go very unseen in a land very unseen, but definitely is marked by wounds.
Yeah. And, I want to start by contextualizing this at a global level, right? Roughly half of the world's population experiences severe water scarcity for at least part of the year. Over 2 billion people live in countries where water supply is inadequate. Half of the world's population could be living in areas facing water scarcity as early as 2025. Water deficits are linked to about 15% of an increase in global migration from the 1990s. some 700 million people could be displaced by intense water scarcity by 2030. This is particularly felt by children. 1 in 4 children worldwide will be living in areas of extremely high water stress by 2040. Ferrial, the problems of water scarcity and water pollution are probably, relatively well known by people. But I think I'd like to start off by asking you your read on global water scarcity, the impacts of climate change on it. I think, there are multiple places where this is being acutely felt. East Africa at the moment, Sub-Saharan Africa is facing its worst drought. What are you seeing as the most worrying trends for water availability, let's say particularly in Africa at the moment?
I think the one thing that, and I think you've mentioned it, is the disconnect between joining that dot between climate change and water. I think that before people were even talking about climate change, we live in a world where we should be treating our water with much more respect. Just to put it into perspective, Malik, if I can just give an idea, a vision of what our amount of water we have globally. If you take a bucket, that would account for the 97% of the salt water. And then you have a cup next to that bucket. That's the fresh water. But of the fresh water, some of it is frozen and some of it is underground, which in terms of drinking water leaves you a teaspoon. And these are just wide kind of graphics to give you an idea of the fact that globally we don't have water to play around with. So that was there before even people were talking about climate change. And then you've got so much pollution that it's actually so scary, because you not only have sewage pollution, which is something that is really a big concern. 800,000 people around the world die from drinking water contaminated with feces. But you have pollution like microplastics, you have pollution from pharmaceuticals, industry, mining, that's almost going under the radar, and not a lot of focus is actually being given to that type of pollution, the industrial pollution that we're experiencing. So even if your wastewater treatment works are working well across the world, it does not remove some of those things. It does not remove some of the pharmaceutical waste that we're seeing in our rivers and our water. So you've got that pollution, you've got the small amount of water, and on top of all of that, you've got climate change. So you're creating such an unstable world in terms of our water, but also it's increasing that divide between those that have and those that don't have. Because the wealthier you are, you'll go out, and this is across the globe, right? You will buy your water, people are moving towards privatization, closing off. And in poorer areas, it's getting harder and harder. And that's what you're seeing. You mentioned East Africa, where you've got a drought that's basically causing desertification in the northeast of Kenya. You're causing instability between Kenya and countries like Ethiopia and Egypt, because Ethiopia is damming up the river, right? So you're creating those kind of systems in already areas where most of the people who are being impacted are living even below the poverty line. It's unbelievable. And so people moving because of water stress, add the stresses of climate change, is just spoken about. And it's a real challenge that we in Southern Africa need to actually wake up and think about it much more.
Thanks for that, Ferrial. I want to touch on the issue of climate change, because it is probably one of, if not the most urgent threats to water security in the world. I've got my own thoughts about this, but could you, for our audience sake, speak about what climate change does to our water cycle? How does it play out at the sort of global regulatory systems that regulate how much water comes in and out of those cycles? And then what does that mean to someone on the ground let's pick a point on the map and say northeast Kenya.
Okay. So the first thing we need to know about climate change, and there's a UNICEF report, and I think you've just quoted from it as well, in terms of the children who live in vulnerable areas. A change in climate is felt primarily through a change in water. So there's a complete change in water cycle patterns because of climate change. So what happens is, in areas like the northeast of Kenya, if you take the lake, I think it's Lake Turkana, where it was drying up at a rate that was far faster than anyone expected. But what happened was, as it started drying up, it became more salty. So fresh water literally becomes more salty because of the soil, because of, whether it's close to oceans, etc. And that salty water cannot be used for anything. It cannot be used for cooking. It cannot be used for drinking. It cannot even be used for farming. So you literally have this shrinking water, and there's nothing you can do with it. And if you look at this whole thing of a change in climate is felt primarily through a change in water, we don't even have to go that far to Kenya, because in South Africa, we've been living it, where in the same week, you've got immense floods in one part of the country, and we're going through extreme drought in another part of the country. And that is the kind of frequency and intensity that we're going to be seeing increase. So besides the water becoming salty and it's drying up, you're also having heavy floods that's washing away your topsoil. It's causing devastation across its wake. In South Africa, we're seeing that more and more often in KZN and in Western Cape. And yes, part of it is linked to infrastructure, but with climate change, the intensity and frequency increases. It doesn't give a country time to actually recover from that. So the floods, the kind of the drying up of the water. But what happens with floods is that in poorer areas, because they already don't have proper drinking water, what this does is the disasters that result destroy or contaminate water supplies even further. So you risk diseases like cholera and typhoid happening more often and with greater numbers, and actually rising number of people dying from it. The increase in the temperatures that we're seeing with climate change in our region, right? So you know this, that when people talk about a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, they're talking about a global average. But we need to break that down according to what that means according to each region. And if you're looking at Africa, when they talk about a 1.5 increase, they actually mean 2 to 3 degrees hotter. So you mean a 3.5 or a 4.5 increase in temperature in our region. And that rise in temperatures can then lead to deadly pathogens in fresh water. So water becomes dangerous to drink. So in terms of the water cycle, from having either too much rain, too little rain, having such floods on the ground that it doesn't allow plants to actually absorb, or you don't allow proper transpiration to happen. You don't allow for your river ecosystems to actually thrive because these floods are just washing it away. And then in terms of access to water, the water's actually, you may have water. And I've heard that many times, like, but yeah, we've had a flood, so we've got lots of water now. No, because it could actually be that water's not drinkable. And the same thing happens in areas of drought, where the water starts drying up, that you could result in more pathogens. So that's, and then of course I mentioned the salty part.
Ferrial, what I love about your way of communicating is how you're able to break down these very complex concepts into really tangible terms, and the way that you bring in, multiple and often seemingly unrelated topics to each other. I want to touch on 2 points that you just mentioned. One is the balance that we have in managing our natural or ecological infrastructure and our built infrastructure. Could you say a little bit more about how the way that we've treated our natural and ecological infrastructure has impacted our ability to provide water to people, and maybe if you could do the honors of just explaining what both those terms mean.
Okay. So if we look at our built infrastructure let's do the natural infrastructure that you talk about, right? So that would be our natural environment, our rivers, our streams, forests, lakes, all of these systems that actually give life to Earth, and the way that it works in terms of the natural infrastructure. So the water cycle is a natural infrastructure of how water has the cycle of clouds, rain, condensation, rain, flowing into rivers, streams, giving life to everything as it goes along. What we've done as human beings is that we've created this mindset that we can live and we can do as we please with this infrastructure, that we can push it away and push it away, and if it's over there. And it's why often when people talk about the environment, they don't see it as where we are. So it's something out there. It's oh, you like environmental issues, so you're into conservation. No, because that's how people see the environment, as it's far away, it's the Kruger Park, or it's walking in the Drakensberg. But it's much more than that. And we've done that. We've separated out the people. And I wouldn't say we, but I would say capitalism has allowed us to actually separate out people from the actual environment. And so we see ourselves as better. We see ourselves as, well, if the fish gets extinct, that's okay. It doesn't matter. We will find another way. And that is part of our mindset, that of this infrastructure that we've destroyed, that natural one. And then you talk about the built infrastructure, which is your massive cities, firstly. And then it's about managing the environment within that built environment. So you have a village, but then you have a town, and then you have a city. Now it rains. Where does the water go? It's supposed to go into the stormwater, and the thinking was it'll go into the stormwater, flow underground where we won't see it, end up in the rivers, and everyone is fine. Then we had waste. So you'll flush your toilet with good water. Why we do that, I don't know. Flush it with good water. That goes down into the sewers, goes into the wastewater treatment works, gets treated, and yay, it's in the rivers, everything's fine. So in the picture of it, we look like we're doing a good job, but we're not. Because we have this idea that it's almost like it's like in our thinking, that if I flush something down the toilet, it's gone, it's good, I got rid of it, But that ends up in our water systems. So, some people have done studies about the high levels of antibiotics in our water. Because you go to the toilet, it's released, whether it's, there's obviously waste from pharmaceuticals, but also through water that goes through wastewater, that you can actually assess what's in the water. They did that during COVID really well, to kind of get an idea of the levels of COVID across the country, because there was, some people weren't showing signs, but they could use wastewater to actually map out the high areas. And that is why, that it does tell a story. The issue with I digress a little bit, but the issue with our built environment is it's built for us. It's built for us to drive, for our kind of, long as I don't see something, it's all good. So your dump sites are outside of the cities. We're running out of land for dump sites. In the old days, it would burn the waste so that it's gone, polluting the air. So we've kind of damaged the cycle by thinking we can artificially deal with it in smaller ways. And I do think that we as ordinary people have a role to play as well. For example, I have seen numerous times where people dump, so the portable toilets from concerts and those kind of things, dumping the toilet stuff into the stormwater drains, which means it's going directly into the rivers and streams. Construction rubble, unbelievable amount of construction rubbles ending in our rivers and streams because it's being dumped in stormwater drains. So what our built environment has given us a false sense of what our environment should look like, because we don't really see the damage that's being caused on the natural environment. I don't know if I've answered your question, Malik.
Definitely have. You definitely have, and you've taken me so nicely into my next one. But I think you're making a point consistently that it requires us to have a total mindset shift in how we understand where our water comes from, where it goes, and our deep reliance on all the interconnected systems that provide us with it. I think to touch on this, let's zoom in a little bit on South Africa, and our water system. South Africa has less than the mean global average. So we are classed as a water scarce country, but because it does come out of our taps for admittedly the majority of our population, it's not really seen as a crisis. What I want to talk about here is our strategic water source areas. When I first started working, I worked as a
Sorry, Malik, I missed you. Sorry, Malik, I missed you. You cut off for a minute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to move us into talking about South Africa's strategic water source areas. Now, this is quite a technical term, and I don't know how well known it is, but it's what I worked on when I first started my job at the South African National Biodiversity Institute. So South Africa's strategic water source areas, there are about 22 of them across the country. They cover about 9% of our total surface area of the country, but they provide us with about 50% of our total water provision. And so their importance can't be understated. So we are disproportionately dependent on these 22 areas. But the threats to them are significant, from timber plantations to commercial agriculture, mining, industrial uses. All of these contribute significantly to eroding them. And we're not doing enough to protect them. I wonder if you want to just speak to South Africa's particular position in how it treats the issue of water scarcity. We have these areas which are admittedly very beautiful. This is diminishing because we encroach in them. But can you talk to how we're protecting these areas which provide us with the majority of our water?
So I think we're not doing very well. If my memory serves me correct, it's taken years to actually get a focus area, looking at water source with strategic water source areas in South Africa. And as you said, even though some of those areas were known and the importance of these water bodies were known, that government allowed for agriculture or mining to happen close to and too close to these water source areas. Of course, in some of them, they couldn't do much because you're looking at high areas of the Drakensberg, which is quite protected. But even then, there were moves to look at how to use these areas. So I think we haven't done very well. We haven't created enough attention on our water source areas. So we know it, right? Because you're in the areas, you know about it. And I think, people like the Center for Environmental Rights have had to challenge, where there were issues around using these water areas, that they had to challenge it. And even, I think, to some extent, the WWF, but I can't remember entirely. But to be honest, if you think about where our water source areas are, I think it's almost like a thin line that comes from, I would say, let's say top of Polokwane up there, and it comes through Lesotho and then a little bit on the south coast. So it's not massive areas, as you've said. But if you look at mining and agriculture, you'll see that a lot of it coincides with these areas. And I don't think we've done really well to protect it. I think that if we think about where we are right now, I think Gauteng gets quite a bit of its water from these areas. So does Cape Town and eThekwini. But the fact that we are not doing well enough to protect it just shows that it's almost, if I can explain it, it's like our lifeline. And if these water source areas become dead in terms of pollution or dries out, it will infect our entire water cycle in South Africa. So it doesn't matter then that Lesotho will have water or whatever. But this affecting these minute areas but massive impact would be devastating for the whole of South Africa. And I don't think we're doing enough to create that awareness. The fact that they could still do mining close to the one in, I think it's Mpumalanga, is and some parts of the Free State is just, it's worrying.
Thanks for that, Ferrial. I think really important that we stress the importance of maintaining the integrity of these areas to as you say, our lifeline. I want to talk a little bit about how government's responsibility in this protection. I think, there's often a very common narrative that says we need mining, we need commercial agriculture.
Yeah.
And, if it happens in these areas, well, so what? That sort of connection between what a mine in a water source area will do, it's not very well understood. I wonder, and I think you're the perfect person to ask this, just explain to us, how does a mine's presence in a water source area translate into the impacts that are felt downstream?
So I first want to just touch on your first comment, which was about government's role in all of this. And yes, you're right. They have a very big role to play. And the reason, I'm so glad you raised the strategic water source areas, because this has been a discussion for a long time. And if we look at how poor, and it's directly linked to poor leadership. So for about 10 years in South Africa, both in terms of environmental affairs, as well as the Department of Water and Sanitation, we had very weak leadership. And very weak in the sense that they didn't give attention to these, it was all about corruption and mismanagement and all of that. So there wasn't enough focus, and it was poor leadership. So it's directly linked to poor leadership. So you can see that. And then in terms of, sorry, your second question was, please, the impact of mine. Sure. I mean, if we look, and that is something else that is mind-boggling. People believe mines when they say they will rehabilitate land, and they will, they have a fund, and they'll finish the mining and they'll fix it. And yes, we need the jobs, etc. But at some point, we need to figure out that argument, and we do need jobs. We need sustainable, good, healthy jobs. The mining jobs, for example, coal mining, the mines do not deal with the lung infections, the disease that miners experience in later years. They do not deal with that. It becomes a government thing because they all go to government hospitals. So there's a lot about these jobs that people talk about. And yes, we have to have a just transition, so we can't just shut them down immediately. But we can prevent new ones coming in near water source areas. If you look at all the areas where there's mining, there's pollution. In Gauteng, people are not talking about it, but we are still dealing with massive acid mine drainage that is destroying many parts of our province, as well as the rivers and streams. But the other thing that mining does is that when it pollutes the water, it's chemicals that actually just create dead water. So there's no life in that water. Your river ecosystem is dead. Oh, by the way, in South Africa, 60% of our river ecosystems are threatened. That's your frogs, your plants, your gogoes, whatever. We can't allow that to happen, because that's what keeps our life, our water fresh, and keeps the water, basically what it is. So you don't want to kill your river ecosystems. And mining does that time and time and again. It not only destroys the soil. If we look at open cast coal mining, if we ask the people in parts of Mpumalanga, where they can see the burning of the mine dumps. All of that has impacts. So it's air pollution, land and soil, and water. That is devastating, right? Also, mining uses a lot of water. They need water for mining processes, and they need clean water for mining processes. So that's the other thing, is that they then have access to large amounts of water, while communities close by, and that's the whole point of environmental injustice, do not have access to clean drinking water. And then that perpetuates. So if you have mining in a strategic water source area, you do not allow that area to firstly have the kind of clean water we need, and you basically create wastelands that speeds up the lack of water that we'll have in this country.
Thank you so much, Ferrial. I think I want to, when you speak, you remind me of a quote that environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. I think I want to touch on something you said just now. It's about the impacts of communities that live downstream. So we touched on mining. Agriculture, for example, uses about 60% of our total potable water that we have available. Talk to me a little bit about what living downstream of an agricultural area does. Oftentimes, agriculture surrounds our mines, and the combination of those can be quite fatal. The amount of runoff that's created during times of heavy rain and collects our fertilizers and our topsoils, puts it into a river, and communities who live downstream of those rivers, who directly depend on them. Talk to us a little bit about the ecological effects and what that means for how a person experiences that water.
So, let's see, where do I start with this one? I think that firstly, that there's a direct impact. But the problem is, it's not like sewage. So sewage pollution, people have diarrhea, they get sick, we can pick it up. The chemical pollution is harder to pick up because it's longer term impacts. So it's the same argument that the tobacco companies had for a long time, that they didn't believe that it caused cancer. Okay. But it's because cancer gets, it's a long term, it's like you don't see it immediately. It's a long term thing. So if you continuously drink water filled with poisonous chemicals, you may not get sick in 5 years, but in, say, 10 years or 8 years, you will start having issues, whether it's young people affecting their reproductive systems or older people having cancers. And it's proving that that's a problem. And the other challenge we have in our country is we do not do enough tests on our water to check for the chemicals or agrochemicals that are going into it. There's just not enough work being done. And the other challenge, Malik, is, well, there's so much, but there are chemicals that we are using on our farms and in agriculture that are banned in other parts of the world. So they're dumping it in South Africa. And that for me is just absolutely appalling, because they know that these chemicals cause harm. They are banned. They shouldn't be in our food. And here we are putting it into our food. We are putting it into our water. And obviously the communities who live downstream, by the way, 9% of South Africans depend on open rivers, streams, wetlands for their water use. So they are directly affected. You don't smell it. It's not something you can see like sewage. So they're drinking water that they think is okay, and it might not be. I'm hoping that in the next coming months, we will be running a campaign to actually do some tests on that, because it's not only the people living downstream. There are farm workers who live on farms and they have access to water. But the farmers have sprays, they spray over the farms and they spray over the water that these people are dependent on or drinking from. But no one's testing it to see how badly that is. And that also is a problem. The Orange River, by the way, is so heavily polluted with a whole range of things that agricultural industry themselves are concerned about, that because it impacts on exports. That's when people get interested. So if you test the food and there's, whether it's hepatitis or it's from sewage or other stuff, it becomes a problem because no one else is going to buy it. But it's the same chemicals that are being dumped in our markets that are affecting our waters that we need to be concerned about.
Thanks, Ferrial. I think I do want to stress that, we want people to stick around in this conversation because Ferrial speaks so coherently to what we need to do to turn this around. But I do want to just stick on the problems in our water system for a little bit longer. And I want to speak now more towards the built infrastructure. So this is everything. I was quite interested recently. I came across someone who didn't know that a dam was not a natural fixture as part of the landscape. Our separation.
I meant to talk about that when you asked about about built infrastructure. Okay. I only talked about the urban, but dams have been a completely crazy idea that we've come up with, and one that we as human beings need to admit were problematic. From China to here, the big dams. I mean, there was that whole 70s where big was what we did, right? It's like big dams, big infrastructure. And it's caused a lot of problems. It's not only damaged river ecosystems, it's displaced millions of people around the world. It's also, in terms of climate change, they're not great. So the idea of when people say, well, why don't we just build a dam? It's actually, that is the worst solution. In many parts of the world, they're now looking at micro dams, which can work because you don't dam up. You still allow things to happen and you allow micro dams. But having said that, we don't have enough water anymore in South Africa to dam if we do want a dam. Did you know how many dams we have? We have about 5,000 dams in South Africa, from small to very large. Of the 5,300 and whatever, I think there's about 300 public-owned dams, so the ones we know, like Sterkfontein, blah, blah, blah. But there are 5,000 private dams, mostly owned by mines and agriculture.
I'm really happy you mentioned this. I remember during my master's, I did a project on the undamming movement, where dams are actually removed from a landscape and the benefits that are accrued both to the people and the ecology downstream. We can talk about that in a second, but I do want us to touch on our water supply systems. Our recent blue and green drop reports gave quite a damning indictment, forgive the pun, indictment of where our water management state lies. Nearly half of all water supply systems posed an acute human health risk because of bacteria and other pathogens in the drinking water supply. The report also found that 2/3 of all wastewater treatment works are close to failure. On top of this, it showed that over 40% of all clean treated water was lost through leaks or could not be accounted for. I also just want to touch on one point, which is that of the 26 water supply of the 26 of South Africa's 958 water supply systems were able to manage the delivery of clean and drinkable water. 26 of 958. And then just to end on one more quote, which is that in the report said that about 23 parts of the country, water supply systems are in a poor and critical condition. Almost half of water supply systems, about 46%, do not comply with microbiological standards. Ferrial, I want you to talk to the sort of, how did we get here with our water supply systems? Joburg, for example, was globally renowned for our ability to provide safe and drinkable water. What's happened? Why have we gotten here?
So I think there's a very simple answer. I think that like many of the departments in government, the Department of Water and Sanitation was completely captured. And that was for about over 10 years. So it impacted so much of the working of the department, to the extent that for a long time we didn't have a confirmed director general. It was always someone who's acting as a director general. The next thing that happened was the blue and green drop report that you're reporting from or quoting from, that in about 13, the first one that came out after 13 years was 2022. And that was because the then Minister Mkhunu, whom I thought was doing a good job, said, no, we'll release these reports. It took bravery and courage to actually release it because the picture's so bad. But Mokonyane, 13 years ago, said we will not be releasing these reports. So for 13 years, we didn't actually know what was going on. We were living in a dark world of not knowing. And that whole thing of ignorance is bliss was really real, right? The second thing was the amount of corruption that happened. So you had national government, which was captured. All focus was on national government, but we failed to look at the capturing of local government. If we look at Hammanskraal, for example, I mean, the money was there. The wastewater treatment needed to be fixed. The money's gone. No one's in jail. And people had to get cholera before there was a spotlight on it. So that is what happened, and why we are where we are here. We have a whole range of reasons. One is the lack of funding or budget on infrastructure, on water infrastructure, is just appalling. So if we look at municipalities, it's usually advised that between 6 and 8% of the cost of the asset must be spent on maintenance. And you need to do maintenance every year. That wasn't done. So municipalities were making money from water, and understandably so, using the water on different aspects of health, schooling, all of that. Or well, supposed to use it on those things, but the money just is gone, right? So they didn't do the maintenance, neither did they look at the schools, neither did they look at clinics. I mean, the fact that 45% of our clinics in South Africa do not have access to water, 45%, right? 25% or 26% of schools do not have running water and basic sanitation. They still have pit latrines in schools. And so a lot of the money from national government was just lost. Municipalities across the country were not doing the work that they're doing. And I need to say they are good people, but in general, the leadership was the problem. It was the leadership, and it was complete corruption, mismanagement, and not spending the money where it needs to be spent.
Yeah, you speak about the money issue. The report also said that we need about 1.5 billion rand to fix the problems that are stated in that report. But it also touches on
much more than that.
Yeah,
I think it's much more than that.
Probably.
I think it's actually in the next 10 years, we need about 1 trillion. And this was said 3 years ago. We need 1 trillion rand to fix the water infrastructure in mostly Gauteng. So, well, I think countrywide. So it's a lot. We need a lot. Okay, more than 1 billion.
Yeah, add another 3 zeros to that number, which I'm sure is very conservative by their own estimations.
Yeah.
But I mean, financial constraints aside, the report also talks to an important point about the lack of technical capacity in the country. The number of qualified people, they say we need about 400 additional qualified people to manage our water supply systems, about 203 technical staff and 197 scientists. It's found that...
I think we have them in the country. The problem is that with these issues, you bleed an institution. So people started getting frustrated with what was going on. It was jobs for pals. And obviously people then left. But yes, we have a very, very big issue around lack of skills at the moment within the departments. I don't think we have a lack of skills in the country.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the reason why I came to this point is because last week I attended a conference on South Africa's strategic water source areas. And I was amazed by how many people there were in that room who were technically like savvy on the state of our built-in natural infrastructure. And I wondered why, we have these problems when you have such brilliant people. And I found that most of them worked in the private sector as consultants, as a whole range of things. And these consultants consult to government to figure out how to fix these things. And you talk to them over lunch and you find out that a lot of the reports that they deliver to them just sit on shelves. So not only do we not have the technical capacity in-house to do the work, but the stuff that we're commissioning, we don't even use properly. So I'm going to come to the point of leadership and what's needed to actually turn this around in a second. But I want to zoom in a little bit. Am I right in saying you live in Greenside?
I live in Emmarentia. Next to Greenside,
Yeah.
Just across the road.
Yeah. Tell me about the water challenges that you face in Greenside. Sorry, in Emmarentia. So
I think it's very similar to what your area would be experiencing, because I think you're also dependent on the Hurst Hill Reservoir, if I'm not mistaken. So we've had issues. We've had issues for almost, I think, when did we start the water crisis? Well, the Water Crisis Committee was started in 2023, 2022, I forget now. But, the issues of just having long outages, long water, kind of just having no water. Till now, we have issues in terms of water supply in Emmarentia. So we'd get cut off, but there's no consistency. At night, from about 10 or so, 9, depending, 9, 10, till about 4, 5 in the morning, we don't have water. They close us up from the reservoir because they need the reservoir to fill. But it's not consistent. It's not like a load shedding where you'll know from 4 to 6, this is what, if you do know, you can prepare. So that's the one thing. The other thing is many of these parts, so Greenside, Parkview, Parktown, Emmarentia, very old infrastructure. And so the infrastructure cannot cope with the amount of breakages that's happening. So you may fix it on this street, but then when you open, the pressure is so increased and then it leaks or breaks further down. So the infrastructure is failing as we speak. The reservoirs are a problem and they're concerning. We've asked for site visits. We haven't had a site visit yet. But, if there's a problem there's a Hurst Hill 1 and Hurst Hill 2, I think that Hurst Hill 1 is closed. It's not working properly. They're bypassing it. And then Hurst Hill 2 I think has a leak in it. So there are serious concerns about the water challenges we have in our area. And linked to your issue of skill is that if we have a long outage like we had with the Rand water maintenance, which is very necessary, that when they open it up again, it's for someone to remember to firstly open up all the valves. And secondly, you have to bleed the system so that you avoid airlocks. If you don't, then they say, no, but the water's flowing. And you'll say, but no, there's no water coming out of our taps. Then they say, no, it's your issue. But it really is their issue because there's an airlock, and an airlock can just block a whole area, can block a whole suburb. Sometimes it's so horrible. It's just one street that won't get water because of that kind of thing. So it's all of those things, Malik.
Yeah, fair. I mean, you touched on aged infrastructure. But, the problems of this area is that it's densified so much faster than the reservoir is meant to cope with. That, in addition to the lack of maintenance that we do, tell me a little bit about what we need to do to turn the infrastructure challenges around. Fixing just Hurst Hill Reservoir is not going to solve our
No.
problems. The
So
pipes
it's
that we use are damaged.
Yeah. So it's a few things. And you mentioned the one thing, which is the densification. And that is not even near as much of the densification and the kind of thing that's happening in the east of Joburg. So yes, you're right. And that is linked to having a more coordinated approach to dealing with the water issues. So you need to have urban planning. You need to have Joburg roads. You need to have Joburg water, city power, all discussing how to actually deal with it. Right now, they're all working in silos. So around the corner from my house, there's a massive hole, right? There was a leak in January. It was reported. They came to fix it in March. Like they dug up the whole thing. They fixed it in March. It's August. There are flowers that are growing out of there because there's a big hole. Because someone hasn't told Joburg Roads that they need to come and fix it. So that's the kind of challenges. Is firstly, you need to have a coordinated approach of having a kind of an emergency team. I don't know what's a good word you can use, or committee that has Joburg Water, Rand Water, roads and planning, because the amount of densification that's happening, some of it I don't think is legal. I don't think that should be happening given the challenges we're facing with the infrastructure. So why is urban planning not talking to other parts of infrastructure to say, or other parts of government to say, in terms of everything, this should not be happening, whether it's roads that can't deal with it. It's just simple things. There's a construction happening close to Doppio Zero in Emergentia. And they didn't think about the number of trucks that are going to be crossing over that bridge in Emergentia loaded with a heck of a lot of sand on it. Firstly, the sand was flowing off and getting stuck into the stormwater. But do we know what the state of our road is across that dam, that it can withstand all of those trucks? It's not what it was built for. So there's those kind of planning things that are not being done. So it's planning. The second thing is we need budget. Now, everyone's going to say, oh, we don't have budget. But let me tell you, I think it's a problem, yes, but we need to find creative ways to find solutions, because and I'm saying creative, not steal, but we need to look at ring fencing money for water, because at the moment we have about 12,000 kilometers of water pipeline in the city of Joburg, and as far as I know, they're only going to budgeted to fix 77 kilometers of that. I mean, that's not even a suburb, right? So we need to ring fence money, and that's what we as WaterCan and OUTA have been calling for, is the ring fencing of money for water infrastructure. You can't have a city if your infrastructure is going to fall apart. Let's give it all the attention we need, but we need all of those structures to be on board to deal, like Joburg Road, Joburg Water, City Power, and Development Planning. They all have to be talking to each other. So that's the one thing we're saying, is you need to ring fence the funding to get that. The city of Joburg, by the way, got 2 loans. One was the loan from the World Bank that they signed last year for $100 million. This year was the loan from the French Development Agency. What are they doing with all of this money? Why are they allowed to get loans? And I think that it's actually it's irresponsible of international bodies to be giving loans to. Can you imagine going to a bank and saying, I'm completely bankrupt, give me a loan? They'll say no. So why are they doing that? To give such high-risk entities such big loans. And we have no oversight as people to see how they're going to be spending that. So it's definitely a budgetary issue that needs to be taken into consideration. And then better planning. So those are the top things in terms of what government can do.
I'm going to read a quote from a Daily Maverick article you wrote. There's no quick fix to South Africa's water crisis, but good leadership, ring-fenced funding, better communication, and active citizens are key to staving off a complete disaster. You've basically outlined most of those points in brilliant detail. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's needed from turning this black box of city council into something that we can actually hold accountable. Why has it not happened yet?
So I think, well, firstly, it's the musical chairs of mayors that we've had. How do you have leadership when there's just absolute no leadership? And that is, you need stability in that leadership. So that black box of leadership is just absolutely absent, right? The other thing is, which is really important, and I think you've experienced this in your activism, is the lack of communication, transparency, and accountability. Is that if we continue down this road and treat people as if they don't exist except when it's time to vote, then I think we're missing the point. Because yes, there are not enough skills in government, but there are civil society and ordinary people are not informed. They're more informed than most people I know when you look at what people are saying in terms of water. So we need to have more transparency. We need a government that is accountable. We need to see people in jail, bottom line. If someone is causing nonsense, if someone has caused our water to be polluted, if they've damaged our infrastructure, if wastewater treatments are not working, people must then either lose their jobs, they must be fired, or they must go to jail. And I know I'm sounding very harsh, but Malik, I'm so across the country, this is a challenge. And until people don't realize that they have to pay a price for the things that they're doing to our stuff, that it's going to continue. So there needs transparency. We need accountability. We need investment in our infrastructure. We need people on the ground to continue reporting. I know people get tired. Continue reporting, continue getting those references, and become actively involved. Because government is not going to fix this on their own. No way.
Fair. I want to end now with one last question, which is what ordinary people should be doing, people who live in these places. You are so fantastic about getting people interested, engaged, informed, and active in solving them. Talk to me about what people should be doing on a behavioral basis, how they should change their own individual lifestyles, and what they need to do to create this more systemic change.
So I think that there are residents associations and there are groups like yourself in every community. We need to create better awareness, because when government says, oh, save water, stop using this water, stop, and people are like, no, you're wasting, so I'm not going to do it. So it's almost like we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. And I think that we need better advocacy and awareness. So we need people to realize we cannot waste water anymore. We need someone to actually devise an amazing advertising campaign that creates awareness where people will not waste water, like we did under COVID about washing your hands and all of that. It needs to be everywhere. We need to change our relationship with water. And the truth is, it's not, we all have a role to play. And it's not a comfortable role. We have to start questioning, and there's uncomfortable things we need to do. For example, if we head in the direction we're going, having a swimming pool in each household on one street might actually not become, the thing that we have to do. We need to move away and move it to have public pools rather than private pools. And those are difficult things. But then we also need to save water. We need to be more aware about dumping water. But in terms of, monitoring and accountability, Malik, a lot of the issues we've seen have been solved because someone noticed it. They were like, I saw this truck doing this, it's wrong. Everyone can take photographs. Become that citizen journalist or citizen scientist that we need, right? And I need to say that people need to also look at how do we stop just becoming WhatsApp activists. And we saw that with the water protest in Emerentia. Okay, it took 10 days of people having no water for people just to say we're going to actually protest. It wasn't massive. It was 60 to 70 people, maybe 80 people. but it created a community, it created a voice, and people were heard. And there's nothing more powerful than ordinary people being heard. And that is what we need to build. We need to build the kind of citizen activism that makes democracy real, and it moves away from just being a vote. It has to be more than a vote. Sorry, Malik, I hope I answered.
You absolutely. It has to be more than a vote. I think that's the key message that we should be ending on here, is that, you know, our participation in our democracy, in holding the people that we've elected accountable, it can't just end at the ballot box. And I'm hoping after the 28th of August, we're able to maintain this momentum that I've seen. You know, we have amazing people who live in these areas, people who care, people who've been active in civic movements for a long time. And I'm really hoping that that doesn't lie dormant post this. You know, we've convened amazing house meetings where people have offered even to start coordinating platforms together and driving things. And you know, that's what's possible with leaders who are capable and willing to put up their hands to drive and coordinate these sorts of initiatives. So that's the message. You know, your participation in democracy doesn't end at the ballot box. It has to be every day. And in the situation that we're in globally, in the country, and at your street level, you have to be aware. You have to start engaging, because ordinary people's lives are dependent on it. Ferrial, thank you so much for this evening. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to end on before I move to close.
No, thank you so much. And these fireside discussions look very interesting. And yeah, it's been, thank you for having me. We are having our World Water Week testing. I just have to add that if you want to do something, you can test your own tap water regularly. And that's what we're asking people to do. Test their tap water, test their rivers and streams. We have a testing kit so people can reach out to us on WaterCan.
Brilliant. What a nice reminder to follow WaterCan and Outer, and particularly Dr. Ferrial Adam's work. She is really leading this charge from a civic movement perspective. Dr. Ferrial Adam, thank you so much again for your brilliant insights. It's always such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We are going to close here. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone.